Are there any questions that anyone has? We have a couple of minutes before we get started officially. And
Priscilla in chat said she uses it about 1 foot either side of the pass stones.
that's like the gutter on the garden where I was weeding at Corey's, that the mulch has to end someplace and the grass has to start, and there ends up being this little war zone where things can get started. Yeah. So if there are any questions, then go ahead and chat them or raise your.
Carol has a hand raised.
Oh,
Go
go.
ahead, Carol.
I hope, did I unmute my mic? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yep,
I could hear
yeah.
you.
Okay, perfect.
We can.
I have a root comment and then a root question. I caused my own root problem this year in my vegetable seedlings. I start a lot of things in little cells, one by ones.
Yeah.
And then I take them out of there and pop them into like maybe a 3-inch round before they go in the ground. In that one by one, I took them out and just popped them in, I just plugged them in. They sat there for a while and didn't budge. And I thought, I turned them upside down. That little one by one plug couldn't get out of its own way. And I never thought, maybe I left them too long in that small, seed starting, box. But it was a lesson learned that we really got to watch those roots and spread them out. It doesn't take long for things to get twisted around.
Not long at all. And
not long. Here's my question. I grew some this year. I threw them in the fridge over the winter, and it was Echinacea pallida. And now I've grown them on. They're kind of small. And I just, I chilled them over the winter and I started them, in March-ish, something like that. They're in a container now that's maybe about a 3x3, but it's 5 inches deep. Here's my root question. That Echinacea has a taproot, and I'm not ready yet to get it into the ground. But I've looked at them and untangled a couple of the taproot. Unfortunately, I might have to overwinter some, but I don't know what to do about that taproot. I'm just curious, should I try to get it as straight as possible? I already had some choking themselves.
Yeah, they do have it's amazing how much root and how far down it goes. I planted an Echinacea pallida, both of them are right, and went to move it 2 weeks later and was amazed at how far the roots had reached down in. I think your best bet is to repot them, even if it's in just a very slightly larger container or the same size container, but take them out of the pot and slice the root. Growers who do Christmas trees, some of the Christmas trees, firs especially, tend to have a taproot. And if they don't transplant them and disturb the root and cut it once, but let it keep growing, it doesn't react well later on. So if you take them out of the pot and go ahead and slice the bottom and put them back in the pot, you buy yourself the time until it's time for them to go into the next size pot. And I think you don't want to pot them up into too big a pot. Most of the growers that I know said that putting a plant into a larger pot right before you keep it over the winter would be death to a lot of plants. That if you're concerned that it's that it might be a little bit root bound, to turn it on its side for the winter. Just set them down sideways so that their roots are not so attuned with gravity when it's growing period. But that's about all you can do.
So then whatever the depth is of the pot that I need to use, if I prevent the taproot from getting too long, and I can go ahead and trim it so that it won't choke itself. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Trim that root.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's like training it. They tell me that if they even have a code for it. The growers who grow liners, so they grow things in small pots or in trays, and then they ship them to other growers as bare root plants. If it's been transplanted once, there's a premium on it that pays for their time in transplanting, but it is desirable to have a 1T or a 2T twice transplanted with some of these woody plants, because every time you transplant it, if you clip that root, you get branching on the root, and the taproot doesn't resent moving so much. So yeah, disturb them if you can disturb them. Hello, it's time, huh, Steve?
Quick, Michelle was asking, do we see bees on the new varieties of echinaceas? We only have the 3 straight species, so
we're growing the straight species.
we can't comment on that, but
some of those new varieties of purple coneflower, which are not purple, most, yellows and oranges, and some of those doubles, I doubt that the pollinators can figure out what's going on with them, with some of those fluffy stamenoid petals that look like a nectarine aren't. Someone asked about the small hydrangeas, Steve, and Snow Queen was the one that we liked a lot that you couldn't remember. Ruby slippers we tried someplace, but I can't remember if we saw how it actually.
Yeah. Nancy says she hasn't seen them on hers, and Michelle said no on it for the double for sure.
Yeah, they definitely like simple plants, simple flowers for sure. I had Steve take this picture this week. This is a full-sized Enchanter's nightshade. And I don't ever want to see them that big in my garden, all those little birds grabbing hold of everything and those roots spread out everywhere. It's a native plant, it belongs here, but I'd rather not have it in my shady garden. So for those who might be new with us here, we're asking people to make sure that your microphone stays muted. We set the meeting up so that you come in with it muted, but make sure that it's muted. And you can keep your camera off, that way we don't have to have faces popping up that didn't mean to pop up. And you can either use your chat or you can raise your hand and to get in your question. If you chat in the question, Steve's watching the chat. If you raise your hand, which is a matter of, so your microphone should be slashed, your video should be slashed. And your raise your hand control is either in the participants menu when you open it up, or it might be in reactions. And I have to change my introductory instructions here again because we've been upgraded again by Zoom. Everything looks a little bit different, Steve.
Yeah, it does.
And if you put it in the chat to everyone. Don't chat just to Steve or to just Janet or to solo Steve, because we're watching the everyone box and we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to look at what's going on. If you've got something that you rather keep just between us, you can wait on it in email or ask us at the end of the program. We'll stick around for you. Once you hit return, it pops up. So sometimes people put their chats in two pieces. And if you do, they sometimes are widely spread and it's a little hard to put them back together again. So type until you're done talking. There we go. So that's all of our instructions. Go ahead. What, Steve?
Okay. Welcome to Free4All Friday. All gardeners are welcome. Come and celebrate growing and cultivating problem solving.
This is our 12th time of getting together on Friday, and so far it's working out pretty nicely. We are bringing to you our questions and observations for the week, and we're asking you to share yours, because the more that we hear about these things, the more that we benefit from each other's experience and become better gardeners, and then the world becomes a better place too. We run gardenataz.org. I'm Janet McConovich.
And I'm Stephen Nicola.
And that's this week at a garden that we'll be telling you about shortly. Our daughter Sonia, who normally does things like tells me what button I push to make our picture look like that, because technically she's very, very good at that. She sometimes pops in. So if you see Sonia and you get an answer in chat from Sonia, or you hear her telling us what's going on, that's because she is our technical wizard and an excellent gardener. She generally is with us on Saturdays for our webinars. I've been working on the website this week because we're determined to not just send you invitations, but send you information that we keep meaning to get put into webinars or in these Free4All Fridays, and we don't make it to get them put in there.
In a timely manner. We could have them get in there, but they might be 3 weeks later.
Yeah, and while I've been working, it is something of a rabbit hole. I'll be working on Article 1, and there's a reference to Article 3. So I go to Article 3 and I find something to change in Article 3, and then I find a picture that has to be updated in Article 3 and a reference to Article 4. That's how we actually set it up that way, that we wanted to be able to write something once and not have to write it again. And the website allowed us to link things together. So we've been putting things on and we keep putting more things on, and we'll be sending you an article, a newsletter this week, because we want to invite you to come out to our garden if you're one of our webinar subscribers. And we want to invite you to come to Julia Hoffman's garden with us virtually next week. So Free4All Fridays. Oops, I have to get a new page that has a way we write Free4All Fridays. And they're open to everybody. So tell people if they have a question, and they can hang on to it till 7 to 8 between 7 and 8 on Friday, they can send us a picture ahead of time and we can talk about it. We've got several of those to talk about this week. Are there any questions that you have?
Not so far, not in chat anyway.
Waiting to be entertained.
Oh, wait.
That
I
we-
need to divide the iris that had the iris borer this year. July and August are the months, if I remember correctly, but I can't remember why. Are all the larvae are in the roots, question mark? Then will I be able to put a quarter of them back in the same spot and not get borers next year?
You're right. The reason that we're advised to divide iris in July is because in July, you're in between the borers eating the leaf stage and the borers leaving the roots and going out to pupate for the September arrival of the moths that lay the eggs for next year. So what you want to do is take them out in July when all of the borers are in the roots so that you can find the roots that have been bored and take them out. You can also do what it turns out my neighbor and Steve's neighbor both used to do, which is put the iris rhizomes bare, no dirt on them, out onto a hot surface and let them bake for a couple of days. That tends to kill a lot of them. And you'll see birds poking around in them, pulling things out. But if you can get all the borers that are in the roots and dispose of all of those now, you probably won't have many borers next year. You'll still have borers because they can fly. And they can smell iris and iris relatives from a long ways away. So they'll live on blackberry lily, on iris, on what's the one that's orange? Not torch lily, crocosmia. They can live on others, so they may be on other places too. And on the other ones, they don't cause as much trouble because they might eat some of the leaf, but then they don't bring iris soft rot into the root. So you'll have fewer, but you might not have all of them. And the longer you wait, the more chance that some of them will have matured, left the roots, and they're pupating in the soil already. And they're really hard to find, man. Really hard to find.
Yeah. Nancy her iris have been decimated by that borer.
Yeah, when the numbers build up, and it can make a big difference when you take out a badly chewed up bed. I did for a client maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I took out all of the iris in this special collection and marked, which ones were the orange ones and which ones were the yellow ones and which ones were the purple ones. Cleaned them all up and put them back in, and they were spectacular for a couple of years. I haven't seen them in the last 3 years, but they were spectacular. And they were just remnants of what had been, by this time of year, every year they were flopping over. They had wet, decaying streaks on the leaves. The roots smelled bad. So you can turn that around pretty quickly with one good cleanup. It's not a pretty cleanup, but you can do one cleanup.
You could switch the picture. My petunias in my window boxes are looking crispy in spots and leggy. This is Lori. What can I do to bring them back or keep them going for the rest of summer?
You can cut them. You can be mean to them. We just took pieces about yay long, a foot or so long, off of the petunias at the library garden in order to get rid of all of those developing seed pods and get some new leafy growth rather than that leggy growth coming out. So you have to be tough and cut them and then let them grow well. If they're not in the sun and they're in a pot or a container or a box that you can move while they're recovering and growing back out, if you can get them more light, get them more light. They don't need more water. They have less leaves, they need less water. And they don't need fertilizer, they just need to start growing. Once they start growing, you can fertilize them a little bit and move them back in place, but cutting them is what's going to do it. You can go along the leggy stems and take all of the seed heads off. And if you do, you'll still have a leggy stem and you still have flowers at the end, but you'll get a little more leaf coming from behind. And then the next week, maybe you can cut out that leggy stem. But you do have to cut them, and it will seem harsh, but you're doing the plants a favor. I love it that you got that little inchworm growing on, crawling around on there, Steve. That's amazing.
Well, I was after the bee, and then I saw the inchworm when the bee moved and said, "Oh, I hope I can get them both in." Missed a little bit on the inchworm and the bee, but he was moving pretty quick.
Yeah, he was. I can't remember what that was. What is that plant?
A still bee.
Oh, right. Okay.
Therese has a hand up.
Hey, Therese.
Hey, hi. I kind of have the same question that Lori was asking about her petunias, but it's my wild geranium. I don't know the particular one that it is, but it's kind of the magenta flowers. So they had that first full flush that's beautiful, and now those flowers are kind of gone and they're leggy and falling over. I'm just wondering if I like chop maybe halfway down, will they come back better, or is there another way to do?
Yeah, the leggy early blooming geraniums like Himalayansi and the hybrids that are hybrids with maculated, they do get long stretchy pieces that come out after they bloom. And I generally, as soon after they bloom as I don't like their looks anymore, we don't miss the flowers. I just cut them hard. I don't worry about cutting them by half or whatever. I just cut them hard and let them rejuvenate completely. Otherwise, you take the stems that have already bloomed, and if you bend them and pull them outward, they'll push down the new foliage and push through the new foliage so that you can just clip just the stems off. But you really want to clip all of what grew and bloomed off, because it's going to replace that stuff anyway. There are pictures of that, I know, on the website, because I just put a link to them in the article that I've been writing this week. With that geranium, and it's one of the blue, Johnson's blue, or one of the ones that blooms early in the year. So I can tell you where that is if I
Sure.
Yeah, let me see.
I've got big like swaths of them, so I'm just going to take hedge clippers and just
That's right. Hedge clippers are a weed whip even. I know a guy who worked on a golf course and had a whole bed of petunias that this time of year they were beginning to look a little scraggly. So he would go out and take a weed whip, and he'd just weed whip a section of petunias, not the whole thing. He said the golfers would say, "What's happened to our beautiful flowers?" So he'd weed whip a quarter of the bed, just in like a dashed line. And then he'd come back and weed whip another quarter of the and let them come back. But he just used a weed whip and then used a blower and a rake to clean things up afterwards.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. It's called What's Up 148. And it's a PDF one that you download, but 3 pages of pictures, pages 9 to 12. What's Up 148. I should put that in here, and then it'll be in the chat for other people. There you go. I got too many.
Lori is asking, even if the petunias look awful near the base, I can really cut them back to that?
Yes, you can. They tend to look awful near the base when they've been let get scrawny like that, because the developing seeds cause the rest of the plant to go into seed production mode and not flower production, not leaf production mode. Once you take the seeds off in the long stems, or individually take the seeds off, you'll see new growth starting at the bottom, right in the open part. At the nurseries, their garden centers and nurseries, you'd be amazed at this time of year. Standing back of the perennial production area are all of the pots that have been taken off of the shelves because they don't look good anymore. They've been carted back to perennial production, and in perennial production, they are just chopping them to nothing and setting them off to the side, and they're going to sell them to you in 3 or 4 weeks as this beautiful, lush new thing. So if you want to be easy on yourself, do some of your plants today, do some of them 3 days from now, do some kind of like the guy at the golf course, weed whipping things a little at a time, or like at the nurseries where they just take them off the shelf and nobody ever sees them.
Teresa's asking, her climbing rose is very tall, so the roses are too high to enjoy. Can I cut the bush in half? If so, best time?
If it's a climbing rose, it's going to bloom. The blooming that it does this year is on the side branches off of the older wood. So any new canes are fair game to cut, or keep a new cane that's shorter that you can train in for next year. But yeah, you can cut them back, and the side branches on that on what you cut back will bloom. There are some big climbing roses and the climbing
Yeah,
roses,
they are.
yeah, enormous climbing roses.
They see some of them in England, and you said that was a climbing rose, so.
There's the whole side of a building.
Yep.
Okay. Well, let's look at that deadheading stuff. My article that I've been writing has got pictures of these kinds of things in it, but this is the time of year that people call me ruthless. Oh, you're ruthless. How could you do that? Well, I've done that because there came a point in almost every plant's relationship with me where I said, I don't care if you die, you look too bad, I'm going to do this anyway. And you don't know the plant until you've either killed it or you've not killed it. So
You should really ask yourself. Oh, I was going to say it was the opposite question, and I'm starting to say it, and I lost it. What would the, you know what I mean?
yeah,
That you should ask the other part.
yeah, what if it doesn't? So we left some dill seedlings at the library gardens. We always do because we're hoping for more black swallowtail butterfly caterpillars to show up. But those plants get big very quickly, and to come up and see at the library a wall of dill is not necessarily what we wanted to have happen. So in the bottom picture, there are some ladies in the background that you might be able to see. The library is closed today, but some of the staff was there, and they are going through the pile of cut down dill that I left at the door that people could take home to use as dill weed in the kitchen. And there's a bucket standing there, a bucket full of water with several of the plants that I dug up, and they're going to take them home and transplant them. But we wanted people to be able to see the gora, and the petunias needed someplace to grow. You might not be able to tell between the picture on the top and the picture on the bottom, but I've taken long branches out of those petunias, even though they were in the shade. Now that they're in the sun, we want them to revive and grow well for us. So cutting back and deadheading, it takes time. It took probably 15, maybe 20 minutes to deadhead all of these big betony that are in the top picture here. But they had maybe a flower apiece on each of their spikes, but the spikes had far more seed coming than they had flower buds ready to go. So I've deadheaded all of those. I've deadheaded the calendula, taken out all of these seeds that are developing on there. And I've deadheaded the salvia behind. And it looks cleaner, it looks neater, and you've encouraged the plants to make more flower in the upcoming times, which are going to be hard for most gardeners. So you have all that lush, concentrated bloom in spring, and then you fall into July where there's not as much color. Neatness helps make it feel better. I haven't cut down the Amsonia at the library, but I'm going to do that. This is a couple of our Amsonias at home. I don't want to have a lot of seedlings of the Amsonia, not yet. I'm filling the areas around the Amsonia with other things like coneflower, penstemon, and I'd like those plants to not have an Amsonia coming up in the middle of each one. So I cut them down from on the left to on the right. I just sheared them. I just took them down far enough that I got all the seed pods, because the seed pods are within the plant now. They bloomed, started to set seed, and then grew up past the bloom. So the seed pods are down in the plant. So I cut the plant back by about half. Indiscriminately, just cut it down by half. And I left the stuff on the ground as mulch. Every one of those stems left a little bit of white sap on it, which is irritant.
Danger, Will Robinson, danger.
Stick your hand in there to cut something more, as I did, and you can end up with a burn on your hand. So now, less than 2 weeks later, here they are grown back up again. You can see all what I did cut off before laying there brown, but they're growing up past all of that, and now there's not going to be a million little seeds dropping on the ground. But
you could have taken them down farther too, couldn't you?
Oh yeah, those guys are old enough that they wouldn't mind at all. But this, although it's not good, I'm not good at selfies. That's a burn from that sap. It probably got on my arm just above my glove when I reached in, and it stayed on my arm while I was in the sun, and that causes a chemical burn. So you got to watch out for those white sap plants.
Yep.
And I think we talked about this before already, Steve, but it's up on the screen, so we'll talk about it again. We expect that we go from the pink blooms of the penstemon, which are now done. There's just a little one here, there. The pink blooms of the penstemon and the pale yellow of the moonshine yarrow, moon something yarrow. That then there would be purple coneflower, and then there would be milkweed, swamp milkweed. But we have been taught by the groundhog that you can cut back even purple coneflower, because there should be purple coneflower blooming all along this path on both sides. But we had very few, like one, because the groundhog eats them. But we found that even though it cuts them back, we get purple coneflower coming up at about half the height and a month late, which is not bad.
No, not bad at all. It's adding a different look to the garden than you anticipate. sometimes.
And it's interesting to me, having just been reading about plants' feelings, that they eat the purple coneflower quite viciously, the groundhog and the deer. They just browse on it, and then they stop. And I thought maybe they stopped last year because I put some bad smelling stuff on it, but they even stopped on the ones that I didn't put bad smelling stuff on. Plants, when they have been browsed, damaged enough, actually change their chemical content so that they don't taste as good. So there comes a point where plants start protecting themselves. Not bellflowers, though, obviously, because bellflowers just keep getting eaten. And we don't hold with the grow. Let me see, what is it? People like to plant daffodils in with their crocus and tulips, so that deer won't eat the crocus and tulips. The animals can smell and eat what's good, what they want to eat. This is a butterfly bush behind, pine in front, and in between a volunteer sunflower. And you can see that somebody's reached in there and eaten. And this is in the middle of a bed. Somebody had to walk through other plants to get there. They can pick out what they want to eat. So you can't really protect plants with other plants. And we do know that if I cut that back, it's going to grow again. It's not going to die. I can cut it back, chop it up, throw it back into the shade, and get it off of the rest of the plants. That's a beautiful picture, Stephen.
Thank you.
I love it.
Should I be, Lori is asking, should I be adding a fertilizer boost like Muir Acid, Hollytone, Bloom Builder, etc. to my limelights this time of year?
This is a good time of year to fertilize, especially in a year that we've had so much growth, such lush growth. It can help the plant support that, but it's not essential. Especially if you use the slow release fertilizer in April, and again, you use it in October. If you do that, there is nutrient being released right now by the organisms that started working on that slow release fertilizer in April and have been breaking it down all along. So if you use a slow release in April and October, there's no real need to use fertilizer now, with the exception of things like hybrid tea roses, clematis, delphiniums to a certain extent. There are some plants that are called greedy plants. They just grow so rapidly and use up everything that they can use up that they can benefit. And they tell you they do that. The leaves will get pale, the growth will slow down. So, but hydrangeas are not on that list. They generally don't need any extra boost.
She's also asking about her Ito peonies, the yellow peonies set blooms this year as I moved them last fall. Is there still hope for them next year? If they bloom this year and are healthy, yeah.
Oh yeah, they're going to keep on blooming. The Ito hybrids bloom on both woody stems and from the crown. So even if you cut an Ito peony all the way back, it's still going to bloom this year. And nothing will change its next year bloom unless you probably have to dig it up and severely.
It set blooms, but it did not bloom.
And that might be the place that you've put it in. Peonies, the biggest reason that peonies set buds and then don't open them is because the buds get killed by frost. Peonies, if they're in a place where when there's frost on the plant, and early in the day the sun hits them and they immediately warm up, it's too fast for them and it'll fry the very tip buds. So most of the time when people say my peony, I moved it and it won't bloom, I ask them to look and see if there are buds that didn't open. If there are buds that didn't open, I say move it to another place or give it some protection. Do something like a little tent over it on the nights when it's going to be frosty. But that might be what was going on. And that's fairly common with peony.
Okay. She then added, I'm a little confused. She then added, I moved them and they did not even set blooms, but yet she said,
Take a
her
good
first question said they set.
Yeah, well,
So, sorry.
People sometimes type differently than what they mean to type. Look closely at the tips of the branches. If there's a little brown nub there, they did set buds on the root part of the plant. And those buds are what they get killed in the embryonic state. They're just little tiny brown tips. If those brown tips are there, then it was trying to set buds and it got killed by frost. And that can happen, especially if you change an environment. We took a a couple of pine trees out that had cracked off in the ice storm. And when we did, we opened up a chimney. There's a frost pocket there now where cold air, the warm air can escape through the canopy of tree branches above. And it becomes a chimney, it becomes a draft, it's drawing air up and it becomes very cold in that area. And we think that that's probably what killed a couple of branches on our young maple tree, was the fact that it had lost the part of the canopy that used to be over it. So they can be really sensitive to that kind of thing.
She said, no brown tips, no buds at all.
There's always hope for a peony. They don't go away forever, so there's always hope that it'll bloom next
Okay,
year.
Carol has a question. It looked like there was the stackies, the big Bethany at the library that was trimmed back. If that was it, will it rebloom?
Yes, it will rebloom, and I deadheaded it. I did not. Let's see if I can go back. How do I go back to it? There we go. Go this way. When I cut the flower heads off. What the heck?
You got to hit the number.
I thought I did hit the number that time.
No, that time you were way off.
Oh, okay. All right, so this is Big Bethany, Stachy's macrantha, and as well as taking weeds out here. There's weeds growing in it. I took all of those flower stalks down to a good leaf and cut them off. I just grabbed a handful of them, pulled them to one side, holding them taut, and then reached down with the clippers and clipped off the base. So they're not cut back, they're only deadheaded. I just took off the flowering stalks. But if I wanted to do it fast and have a big planting of them, like maybe they do down in Belle Isle, the Udall garden, I could just take shears and just chop the top of the plant. And not only will they grow back, but they're going to bloom again. They won't bloom as heavily as they did the first time. Each plant had probably 25 flower stalks. When they bloom again, they might have 10, 12. And then I can deadhead them again, and they tend to bloom in August as well. So not only does it make them look nicer to keep them pruned back, deadheaded, but it does encourage more bloom. And the same thing with the calendula. They just look better if they've got the spent flowers taken off, but they also do grow more leaf and have more repeat flowers when you do that. Oh, so, how do I go backwards? There we go. Oh, I'm showing up before I'm supposed to get there. See, sorry.
Well, I had a couple questions still.
Oh, okay. About deadheading and stuff.
Suggested fertilizer for clematis, and then from Therese, and then do clematis eventually decline from age? I have a violet type 3, about 10 years old and getting smaller each year.
Okay. First it was about deadheading clematis.
Fertilizer for clematis.
They're greedy plants, and so some extra nitrogen is what they're really looking for, because they tend to grow very large amounts of foliage, and they're using up a lot of nitrogen. If there's a lot of nitrogen in your soil or in your ecosystem, because the soil doesn't really hold nitrogen, then they may not need it. If your soil is okay for phosphorus and potassium, you don't need anything but nitrogen. So but some kind of fertilizer is a good thing to have for them. The clematis that I know, and they can live a long time, 20 years, 30 years. I remember cutting Sandy. Remember Sandy and Bob had clematis. Yep. And these guys had stems as big or almost as big around as my 3 fingers put together. And she chopped it all down. I said, "Oh, I don't know. It's a really old clematis." And they came back like gangbusters. So a clematis can live a long time. It's a woody plant, and it's going to renew itself. If you don't let it renew itself, if you don't let it get new stems, and that happens sometimes to people, they are so protective of the clematis that they won't go down to the bottom and clip out an old stem now and then to encourage new stems coming from the bottom. Then the stems can get weak, especially if they get broken. Birds will pull on them trying to get pieces to put in nests. The wind will blow them around, and if the stem gets much broken at the bottom, it gets weaker. So you might want to cut it back and let it renew itself. And then on a regular basis with the late blooming clematis, like Clematis viticella and Clematis juliana and Clematis violacea that bloom later, I pretty much always cut those all the way back, or nearly all the way back, so that they've got lots of new growth, because they're going to bloom on new growth anyway. It doesn't really pay. When I don't cut them all the way back is when they're going up to some support, they're going up into a bush, or they're going up on a trellis, and then I will cut back most of it to the ground, but I'll leave some of it still attached to whatever the support is so that the rest of it can climb up and follow the leader. But they shouldn't decline they aren't like daisies or coral bells where they just kind of get more decrepit. If they're kept in one place, they should continue to grow.
Lori's asking what fertilizer like a Miracle Grow or Bloom Builder okay to use on Jack Manny? And when is the best time to move them?
The fertilizer that you use is always dependent on what your soil test says your soil needs, or else you should use a balanced fertilizer or just nitrogen. The Bloom Builders and the Miracle Grows tend to have, the Bloom Builder tends to have high phosphorus, and most of us do not need phosphorus in the soil and can actually do ourselves a disfavor by putting phosphorus on because it'll tie up other nutrients. So if you don't need phosphorus, if you've never had soil tests that says that you're low on phosphorus, then don't use the Bloom Builders. Just use something that has the same three numbers, 20, 20, 20, or 40, 40, 40, or 5, 5, 5. Or just use nitrogen, just use blood meal, just use, if you're in a deer area, that can actually help you keep some deer away too, because they will be clematis. And when is the best time to move them? Pretty much when you want to move them. I usually try to move them in the spring. I moved one last spring and took some pictures of it and put it in an article on the website so you could see what it was. But I moved them all times a year because they need to be moved. We had to move one because the septic field was being dug up, and this beautiful old jackmany was on the lamppost, and everything was going to come out of that area. So I dug it up and moved it, and I think it was July. I'm pretty sure that it was because it was hot and sweaty and miserable, but it did fine. And then we moved it back 4 weeks later. So if you give it a lot of water and some care, like when I first moved something at this time of year, I try to shade it. We put in some new plants that I dug from one place and moved to another place at the library today. And if I was going to be there regularly, I would have left bamboo stakes with a piece of landscape fabric shading them on top. Or at my house, I move a little ladder over and put some landscape fabric over, just shade them, water them well, and let them recover for a bit. They can move pretty much whenever they're going to move, especially if you're moving something that's not doing well. Why not move it now? It can only be better if you're moving it to a better place. So just move it. And I'm supposed to be changing pictures. She does beautiful containers. Julia does.
No other questions at this time.
Okay, everybody's looking for us to entertain. You guys are going to run out of things to do here as I don't have other people's. Someone asked about whether you can reduce a bird's nest spruce, and today 2 people at the library asked me about reducing the size of an arborvitae. So we actually did some of that. So I'm bringing pictures. They're not from this time of year because it's not when I usually do this kind of pruning. And I'm going to show you this spruce first because it's easier to see the new growth versus the old growth on a blue spruce, the new growth being blue. Barb wanted to have this spruce not taking over her patio. So I was looking at it to see if it could be cut back to smaller. And I'm looking inside to see how far back the needles go. I need to leave needle on every branch that's left after I cut. If there's not needles on the branch, it's not going to sprout out needles, not on a spruce or an arborvitae or a juniper. Those PJ Facts, pine, juniper, fir, arborvitae, cypresses, and spruces. So I'm looking at, and if you look at where the edge of the patio is and you look at where the green stops, so here's the edge of the patio, we're just barely catching it in time. We can cut it back to here and it'll still have growth, places where it can grow. So I cut it back to the edge of the patio. That cut off a lot of the new growth from this year, but there's going to be more new growth coming. And that new growth that's blue, so deep blue, when it comes out, it's going to go to more blue-green in a little bit anyway. But that's as far back as I could take that one, and it filled out real nicely. Bird's nest spruce, which is a cultivar variety, a variant form of Norway spruce, is a big plant. We plant them by the foundation, and we really can't let them get as big as this. I've seen them almost 20 feet across. They're only 4 feet tall, but they're 20 feet across.
There's a couple I've seen almost 5 though.
Oh yeah, they'll mount
Yeah.
up. And we put them in places like this where we want to keep them off the walkway. So if I do that, I tell people to cut them regularly. And I do most of this kind of cutting when it's cool at the end of the summer. End of August, beginning of September, or in this case, it's even into the 1st of October. And what I'm doing is the same thing that I showed you doing with that blue spruce, but it's not so immediately evident here where the new growth is versus the old growth. I'm taking every tip that comes out over the edge of the walkway. I'm grabbing that tip and I'm running my pruners back in until I'm at a side branch that has needles on it, and I'm cutting way back in here because I want that tip that I cut to be able to grow for a couple of years before I cut it again. And I'm literally just opening my pruners and running them along the branch until the pruners stop. And then I look to see if the stop is a side branch with branches on it. So this is something I took out. I took out enough for, here's 1 year's growth up here with the white blonde wood. Here's the 2nd year's growth, 3rd year's growth. I took this one all the way back 4 or 5 years, but most of them I'm taking back about 3 years. So I'm cutting them about this far back. And that's going to leave these tips, these side branches, to fill out. See that little side branch right there? That baby will grow like 60 when it's out in the light.
Amazing what light does for these plants.
Yep. And I don't like to do it when it's nice soft new growth. We're told to pinch when it's soft new growth, because if I cut it when it's soft like this, if I cut this branch here, it can develop buds on the soft branch. So if I pinch, I can get more branching at the tip. But I don't want more branching at the tip. I want the light to go all the way in, and I want these to continue to look feathery. Plus, I like to enjoy that fresh new green. So I cut further back in. Now, bird's nest spruce, this is at a client's in Detroit, and we put these in 20 years ago. And they've been being sheared regularly, not reach back in and cut to a side branch. And what happens as they're being sheared regularly is that some of the branches that are cut off have no green on them, and they just sit there brown. They can't do anything, and that brown begins to build up. At our friend's house, it had built up a lot. And I looked and I said, no, we have to, I'm sorry, I should have told you how to prune these, but you can't just take a shear and shear them, because the wood won't go away on its own, nor will it grow. And you get more and more dead building up in it. This one was, let's see, when did we do that book? 90. So this was 15 years of shearing. And it's got dead chunks in it. And she said, well, can we save it? I said, yeah, we can save it. We don't have to put a new one in. So it's still leafing out, but it's leafing out from the tips. It's not going to leaf out from back in there where the dead was all built up, and certainly not from over where the dead is over here. So I'm going to go in and take all of the dead out, which is a laborious task. First, I take out that part that was sticking up and had nothing within the area that we could really rely on. I took that part off. And then I go in and I start taking brown branches, pulling them down and finding out where do they come from, and taking them back all the way to the trunk or to the side branch that they come from. And that is laborious and picky to do. But
Picky, wear long sleeves.
Yeah, this is why, especially if it's a juniper, because you do the same thing with junipers. But this is what I ended up with. You can see where I've had to take off some large branches. I went, well, there's nothing good on this one at all. But that's the next spring and the next summer, and this is now. So yes, you can cut them back, but you have to be realistic about how far back you can cut them. And it's better to do it regularly. This arborvitae at the library, we cut every 2 years. Usually I cut it in August, but today the other gardeners were asking about it. So I said, well, let's cut it now. See, it's gotten a little wobbly. It's no longer, it's growing out here too much. It's got too many leaders coming up. It's a little too tall, and I'm not good at remembering where I took the picture from, so I've switched sides. This is before, and here's our lumpy top, lumpy sides. And now what we've done is we've taken, maybe it doesn't look like it, and that's part of the thing you want to do. I was told that if you want to prune well, if you prune well, you might lose the job because they'll think you did nothing. But we've given it one top, not multiple tops, taken it all the way down. The other gardeners were concerned about leaving a hole here and a hole here as they
they'll fill
this part and this part. I said, no, look back in there. Every branch you left in there has a green tip on it. That's going to grow and fill that hole for you and keep it looking nice. So try to do it less often rather than you try to do it regularly rather than waiting 5 or 6 or 10 years to cut it back. It's possible.
Margaret is wondering, are you working at the library tomorrow?
Yes, we are. We're working from 1 to 3 tomorrow. So be there, if you'd like to be there. We're deadheading, we're doing the ditzy stuff. We're deadheading, cutting back and weeding.
That's the Waterford Township Library.
Right, Waterford Township Library in Michigan. And we didn't do our work on Wednesday, not because it was raining. It was raining lightly at that time of year, but though it had rained so hard the night and morning before that the rain garden, which desperately needs to be weeded, was full up of water and we couldn't work in it. So we were waiting for a drier day, and it has drained out now. So we're ready to go.
Kathy was wondering if we would give advice on reducing the size of boxwood that are not a hedge. They are very full.
And you want to reduce the size? I can bring the pictures next week, or we can just talk about it now, because it's done the same way, except that boxwood will grow from bare wood. So if I'm trying to bring a boxwood back from being as big as the screen here, and I want it to be this big, I'm going to take some branches all the way back in to leave them just a couple inches, so they'll because as full as it is, it's got a part in the middle that doesn't have green in it because it's gotten too shady in there. And I want to let some light in. So I'm going to take some of those branches back, way back in, and leave them only maybe a 4-inch branch to grow on. And then the rest of them I'm going to cut back part way. And if you want them to be natural and look soft, don't do that with shears. Do that by hand, where I'm just taking each branch, looking for the heavier part of the branch and cutting it back. And I can bring in pictures and show you that later. It's not, I'm glad that it's not a hedge, and I hope that it's not 40 plants, because boxwood can get really old in a hedge. And I don't mean the plants get old, it can get old cutting it. It's like, could somebody please spare me? And bending over all that time is not nice to do. It's hard to be comfortable pruning a low boxwood hedge. But perfect, especially if they're full, it's perfectly able to do it. I would not cut them back that way right before the hottest part of the summer, because some of the wood that you're exposing is not going to grow very well if it is suddenly taken out of its nice shady spot and put into a heat furnace, a blast furnace.
Yeah, wait for a bit.
Yeah.
Some
people had asked about where Julia Hoffley was our guest speaker at our webinar last Saturday. And she's garden royalty. I loved that term somebody used. She's garden royalty. She's got an incredible garden and an incredible sense of finding just the right plant. And people were asking where she got her ornament and sculpture from. So I made that list for the person who asked. But if anybody else is interested, these were the ones that came first to Julia's mind. First were estate sales. She does a lot of estate sales. She trolls on Thursday, goes back afterwards. She has a 200-year-old wrought iron bench. She has park benches that came from Central Park in New York originally. She has, and those came from estate sales. She has a remade bench that she got from her mom's garden. She has just a lot of cool things that she picks up at estate sales. But otherwise, Goldner Walsh in Pontiac, Fogler's in Rochester, Michigan, Picnics in Oakland, Michigan. I have to get up there. I've been told by a couple of people Picnics is pretty cool. The Garden Mill in Chelsea, and she couldn't remember which cement works in Owasso. There are several. It's a kind of an artist enclave up there, and it's not that big a city, so you might want to go take a look and pop around 3 or 4 of them. You can Google it first. This is a old iron footed pot that she found at an estate sale.
It could be amazing what you can find just as you're driving along, like Jan and I have done. And hey, wait, that looks like a nice nursery. Let's pull in there. We pulled in one, where was it? Up in Georgia Bay, where we took the trolley, and then we found that one. I'm not even sure we were supposed to be on that road. And remember the art that they had there?
Yeah, it was very cool place. And so yeah, you just shop a lot. It's a little like Steve's mom. Steve's mom was an incredible shopper. She could find anything. I would sometimes call her and say, "I'm looking for this. If you can keep an eye out." I'm not a good shopper. I don't like to shop. I like to go someplace, get something, and come back away. Where did we put Julia's garden? Because we should tell people about that now. If you are interested in seeing a beautiful garden, Julia has agreed, and Steve and I have set it up to walk you virtually through her garden next Friday at this time. So we'll do questions for half an hour, and then we'll turn it over to Julia. we're standing here by a Rosa Sharon that she propagated from one that was in her mom's garden. But
Not the one in bloom, it's the one next to them.
but there's an acre of packed with plants garden. Steve has a lot of pictures of it, so that even if it's a rainy day, Julia's going to be able to show us what's going on. So if you want to join us for that, that's next Saturday and next Friday, 7 to 8. We'll send you a reminder.
Yep.
No other questions?
Somebody commenting, Janine has estatesales.net. She checks.
Estatesales.net. Wow,
Yeah.
that's great.
They go to regularly go and always look at the garden tools. She started buying and giving away potato forks. Estate sales, they're about $5.
Potato forks.
Yeah.
Oh, I
And-
see where I am. I'm at the end. Okay.
Margaret earlier asked about the library, then she said she'll bring a book, your book. Wanted
Okay.
geranium you saw here, she asked. Sorry, but
That's Margie, and what was the question?
are you working tomorrow at the library? And she said she'll bring your book.
Oh, okay.
Want a geranium? She wants to know if you want a geranium you saw here, wherever here was.
No, that's okay. I can wait on things. I don't have places to put stuff right now, so, but thank you, Margie. Yeah,
Teresa's wondering what's a potato fork?
It's a broad tine digging fork. The narrow tines are not good for lifting up potatoes. My spading fork is a good potato fork, where the tine of the fork in cross section is flat on the top and in a triangle down below. It's like a broad triangle, so you can actually lift soil and lift potatoes with it. And the tip is a little more blunt than the finer tined forks, so that you don't pierce.
That kind of fork was my favorite weeding device.
Yeah, it still is mine.
Yeah.
Still is mine, but Steve got a new fork and they don't make the same kind as I have anymore.
Nope.
So I've been able to get it. People have been asking about mildew and all kinds of other things. We try, especially this time of year, don't sweat the ugly stuff. It's ugly. You can just cut it or ignore it. If the plants are in a good site, they're going to be survivors. This is some of our Pullman area, and this is mildew that we're looking at on the leaves. And I see a tree growing in them. The mildew fungus has been growing inside the leaf and consuming the valuable parts, especially the nitrogen. So it's been killing the leaf for quite a while, and now the conditions are right for it to be able to make spores, and that's the white that we see. That happens when you get these nights that are the relative humidity is real high. And that's just going to happen on some plants. Now, the interesting thing with our pulmonaria that I was just showing you is that these are all clones of the same plant. I picked up a pulmonaria out of one garden, divided it into 20 pieces, and spread it out through here. Those that are in the place that gets sun.
And it may not have been a huge amount of sun different, but you could.
Yeah, you can tell that that's where the mildew is the worst, not only because maybe the relative humidity change was greater there, but also because these plants are happier. The ironic thing is that the plant that I didn't take in that garden, that I didn't divide into pieces, is in the full sun and has not got any mildew on it. So it may more be the relative humidity and the change in the difference between
Air circulation with the pine bowl overhead.
Yeah.
Branch.
But if they're in a good place, they're fine. Earwigs, yes, are bad this year. And almost every place that I've been, earwigs are bad. This is earwig damage. They don't generally kill things, but they're
They
just
could munch away.
ugly, nasty plants. And if you want to verify that earwigs doing this, go out at night, because that's when you'll find them doing it. A flashlight can show you all kinds of icky things in the garden at night. They ate the petals off of part of this Peruvian lily. Tender plant. I mean, it's supposed to look a little ragged, but not as ragged as this.
Yeah, they made it look pretty raggedy.
Yeah. But I like to concentrate on the color, what's looking good, what's doing well. I do have to pay attention, especially in this newer part of where we extended the garden over to the neighbor's side. You have to keep an eye and look and say, wait a minute, some things are not doing well. They were doing well last year. I'm not sure exactly what it is, although
They did do better. This one seems a lot smaller. Maybe there were some weevils in there that we didn't notice.
I think that there are a lot of weevils. We have a lot of the Asian Asian garden beetle in this area. And they had a good year. They're another one that there's a lot of earwigs and there's a lot of the Asian garden beetle. And the grubs of the Asian garden beetle are as bad as the Japanese beetle and maybe almost as bad as the black vine weevil. So I think these lost a lot of root over the wintertime, but I'm still going to move them over to a different place, pay more attention to them, and I'll find something else with gold foliage to put in that place. Or babies.
Yeah, they're not doing well.
Yeah. And our sunflowers always don't do well, but look at them. They tell us, well, I'm still living. I've got a green stem. I can still find.
I'm gonna make a flower, and some squirrel's gonna come and bite it off and drag it away.
Yeah. We also are looking at things like not mildew going on. This is a late lilac. It's Syringa villosa. Most of the lilacs, the old-fashioned lilacs that we grow that bloom on Mother's Day, are vulgaris, Syringa vulgaris. This one is a species that blooms later, so they call it late lilac. It's Syringa villosa, and it's 2 stories tall, maybe a little more than 2 stories tall, so about 50.
Yeah.
And it's an important part of the bird highway. All the birds use it as a staging area. And when we moved in, I saw that it was in trouble in the summertime. Now, do you see the bronze leaves? This is probably mite damage, probably a rust mite that makes the leaf look rusty.
And that's pretty heavy mite damage.
Yeah, it's just an overall cast to the plant. But I'm not going to treat it for mites. We're certainly not going to do that, not with all those birds in it, and it's against the way that we deal with things. But we wouldn't be doing it, especially since I've crawled around in there. Steve went in. Thank you, Stephen. I know you don't like to crawl into the garden, but looking in under the plant at its base, can you see all the little skinny branches that have grown and died in here and are growing again? This is a fairly good indication. Here's one in the wintertime so you can see it. And this is a different lilac, but the same thing going on. All of this little skinny, weak growth that it grows and then dies is being stimulated by eriophyid mites that infest the crown of the plant. And they can get into other woody plants too. I saw that when we first got here, and I thought, oh, I should take that out. But once we put in the bird feeders and saw how much the birds use it, we said, no, we can't take it out right away. So we've planted behind it a fast growing, very big shrub, the sweet shrub.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, but it's growing very well now. So it's time that I can take this one out.
Yep.
And I would have taken it out anyway, because here's its partner. There's actually 2 of them in there. Do you see where the roots are? This entire area I have been digging plastic out of. About 8 inches down, for whatever reason, there's a layer of plastic. So these plants are not healthy. They've been growing in a bad place. Taking them out is going to let me get more of that plastic out of there and give the plants a better chance. So yes, they have eriophyid mites. They might have rust mites working on their leaves as well. But the problem is that they're a weak plant to begin with. If they're well sited, they were in better soil, they would be doing better. I'm just going to take them out. And that'll be,
Why fight them?
yeah, it'll be a winter.
Plus, I like the sweet shrub better. Sue is wondering, for pruning spireas, do you use the same technique of cutting out a few branches low in the middle of the shrub, or after pruning the top?
If it's a spirea that I'm concerned I might lose the bloom, like one of the spring blooming spireas that bloom on the wood that grew this year is going to bloom next spring. I can cut those pretty hard right now. I'm at the outside edge. I usually go by the 4th of July being my cutoff time for spring shrubs. If I get them cut by the 4th of July, they still have plenty of time to grow wood that's going to be old enough to bloom next spring. But if I'm cutting them after now, then yes, I'm going to cut some branches back and not others so that they can start filling out from the inside. If they're the summer blooming spirea, I don't really care. They bloom and you can shear them and get rid of those.
Whack them right down.
Yeah, or you can whack them all the way down because they're going to bloom on new wood, regardless. I like that they bloom a second time. The summer blooming spireas, and that's enhanced if you cut off the flowers that are there the first time. But it's kind of a meticulous job cutting off all those flowers that bloomed on the outside. Most people shear them.
Okay. Therese found a red beetle on her white lilies. Never saw this before. Have you seen them?
These are the lily leaf beetles that we were telling you about, and you could find in one of our first
11.
number 11.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's, the lily leaf beetles aren't on this one, but,
Oh, I didn't know where they were.
one of
I
our,
mean, we didn't have them here.
oh,
Never
yes,
mind.
in Michigan, you mean? What?
Yeah. Well, the
Yeah.
little leaf beetle, no, sorry,
Let me start over.
ignore me.
Okay, the red lily leaf beetle, we did cover in one of the first Friday meetings, and we showed some pictures of it. So people would know what's going on. It is a beetle that has the ability to eat anything in the true lily family. So it can eat lilium and it can eat fritillaria. So if it's any kind of a lily, they live on it. If it's a fritillaria, they live on it. And they emerge from the pupa, from their developing state in the ground. They emerge at the same time that the plant comes up in the spring. They eat the leaves. They're bright red. They're lipstick red. You cannot miss them. Beetles. They don't belong in North America, but they're here. And they're in Michigan now. They eat the lily, they'll eat the flowers, they'll eat the stems, they'll scrape everything, and they'll lay eggs in the spring on the leaves. Those eggs then hatch into larvae that are disgusting. They're like slugs, but they keep their excrement on their body and coat themselves. They become black and gooey, and they're just totally disgusting. They eat the leaves too, until they get old enough, and then they drop off into the soil. They pupate. They come out as the second generation of lily leaf beetles, which is what you're seeing now. If you want to get away from, if you still want to grow lilies and you want to get away from them, then in the spring, when the lilies break to the surface, you need to be out there every day or a couple of days squashing adults until you see eggs. When you start seeing the bright orange little eggs being laid on the leaves, you need to not let those eggs hatch. You need to take those leaves off, or you need to cut the plants back. You need to deny them food and not have a second generation. You can also use an insecticide, but they're very difficult to kill without losing leaves off of your lilies and seeing damage to your lily flowers. There is a researcher at Michigan State Extension professor who is working on producing a parasitic wasp that's been identified that will help control the population of lily leaf beetles. It's not a parasitic wasp that belongs in North America, but it is one that lays its eggs in lily leaf beetle larvae. So they're looking for people to catch lily leaf beetles and send them to Tollgate to the researchers picking them up, or East Lansing at the campus. If you're interested in that information, you can send me something and I'll dig out the address of the person there.
Nancy says her Mugo pine has white on all the needles. Could it be mildew? She got to take a picture.
No.
I would almost bet for sure it's pine needle sawfly. I mean, that's scale.
Yeah, if it's the needles of pines rarely get fungus problems on them like mildew, but they do get scale. They're little tiny insects that have affixed themselves to the leaves.
There'll be little bubbles almost.
Yeah, and you need to deal with those in the spring when the pine is leafing out. You can use an oil spray on it. You can use even hard water spray. This time of year, it's difficult to kill the scales except with a systemic insecticide. And Mugo pine is famous for it.
Yep.
The more you can prune the Mugo pine so that it's got air flowing through it, the less scale that you'll see.
Okay, it's after 8.
It is.
Yep.
Still didn't get things. Well, we're going to stay for a minute longer because Barb asked us about something on the same day that we were asking about something. Is this friend or foe? Barb found these. It is a caterpillar. The head is here. The tail end is very interesting, the little fins on the backside. And what we did with this, because it's not one we were familiar with, is we took the picture and dragged the picture over into a search engine. Google is what we use, but there are others that you can do. And it came up with similar pictures. We looked through, and I rely on bugguide.net quite a bit. And if I go to Bug Guide, I find that this is almost certainly a Catocala neogamma. It's called the bride, and it's a moth. It's one of the underwing moths. They're called underwing moths because their colors are covered by their top wing. See it there? When they're hiding on the bark of a tree. They are not they're Eastern North America species. They're not particularly troublesome because there's never very many of them. They live on hickories and walnuts most of the time. So we have a new one, the Bride. But on the same day, I was letting the dogs out into their dog yard this morning, and this guy was crawling around on the stairs in our garage. Not too far, not too far.
It's a huge beetle.
This is probably maybe a root boring beetle, sometimes called the Palo Verde beetle. It's one of the biggest beetle species. It is the biggest beetle species that we know of in North America, and it can get to be up to about 3.5 inches in length. Steve let it walk around on his hand. Now it can bite if it's aggravated. I'm not sure that it's not a venomous bite, and I don't know how hard it would be, but it could bite. But he let it crawl around while he was trying to take a picture of it. We dragged that picture in. We knew it was a longhorn beetle. The longhorn beetles there's 10 segments in that antenna, makes it a longhorn beetle. Bug Guide tells me which they can be black or they can be brown, but this guy matches the little spikes on his thorax here, his pincers, which you can't see because they're down my picture, his eyes. Everything matches except this guy belongs in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and California. It doesn't belong here. It's called the Palo Verde borer beetle because it eats the roots of Palo Verde trees and trees in the related species Parkinsonia, which is kind of interesting. I think he might have come in with one of the bags of seed that Steve is always pouring into his big bins of birdseed. It might have come in with a plant. We're not sure, but it doesn't belong here. And we're not going to let it loose outside. It's kind of sad to see it just sitting there dying, but it's a cool beetle. Steve was watching this American lady butterfly coming in for a landing over here on this purple coneflower, which is just beginning to bloom. The outside ring is blooming. And so she's going to work her way all the way around and catch every one of these flowers that's open in the outside ring on the early coneflower. Isn't she pretty? Didn't miss a one. So that's it for Free for All Friday, our 12th time. We'll be back next Friday at this time. And we'll have Julia Hoffley with us, as well as pictures from this week in her garden so that you can take a look there. If you've got questions, then please send them to us by email or text. Most of you know our phone number anyway, but the phone number is on the website so that you can text if you want to. But pictures help. It helps show people what it is that you're seeing and thinking about.
High resolution pictures, not super high, but the higher, not kilobytes, megabytes.
Steve, I'm talking to your belly there.
Oh, shoot. I bumped it. Sorry.
There you go. Yeah.
Make sure they're higher resolution pics.
Well, what happens to people is they don't realize that if they put 6 or 7 pictures together into one email, the program downsizes them and they don't even realize that. So no more than 2 or 3 pictures per email. If you need to send us 3 or 4 emails, that's okay. We like to see the pictures and we keep them and we find them. Sometimes if we can't find out what it is that's going on, we share them with people. I transfer them to my phone and walk around and ask people that might know what it is. But it's I love doing it. I love finding out what might be going on that I'm going to run into and haven't run into before because you guys let us find it out. I'll be at the library tomorrow at 1 o'clock and we'll be back here at 7 next week.
Ta-ta for now, everybody. Have a great week.
Yeah. Talk to you later. See you, Diane. Thank you.